Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, and it's time for us to go through some financial petitions this morning. I hope you're ready for that. I'm not prepared for it. I never am. I'd like to think that I have some financial sense, but some people have a lot more than me. And so that's why I'm having a friend, Matthew Conover, today, who I'm going to bring on camera here in a couple minutes. And I should have had some clear thoughts about what it was I wanted to say before I brought him on. I know that we need to have our daily prayer. We've been going through the 40 days of prayer suggested by the GMC leadership, and we've been faithful about that, reasonably faithful. But before we begin, I do remember yesterday we were looking at a hymnal published by Sterling. I think his last name's Allen, isn't it? He published a hymnal full of Charles Wesley hymns for the Convening conference that we went to the website, and it said, you can only pick it up there. We're not going to ship it. So I kind of complained, and they said, actually, we do think they're going to ship it. It's just they're not ready to in a couple. They will be in a couple days. So if you check in on the Seedbed website for them in a couple days, then you can probably order it. It might even be able to get to you before the Convening conference, but I don't know. I get the sense that things are just kind of, a lot of people working hard to get this together. There's a lot of work to be done, so we'll pray for them. Let's actually go ahead and pray right now. Let's see. This is we're on September 13th right now. I want to make sure folks who are on Facebook and YouTube, you should be able to comment and let me know that you're live and where you are and where you're joining us from. I'm not seeing, it says we have 2 people on right now. We usually have a few more people than that, but maybe everybody's going slow on a Friday. So, but it says we're live and it says we're on all 3 platforms. So we got 4 people, 6 people. Okay, now it's finally climbing. All right, well, we need to pray. Sign in and let us know where you are, where you're coming from, what financial questions you would like us to answer today. And let's be in prayer. Jesus, your peace is forceful, alive, quite effective, overwhelmingly good, on time, always unchanging, personal, refreshing, and to the point. Let it rule the hearts and minds of the Convening General Conference now. You desire to flood Convening General Conference with peace. Amen. Not a bad reflection at all. That is a worthy insight. God's peace is forceful. It's not something that is weak, but it's efficacious. And so as we submit to him, we submit not to some effete, inept, neutered God, but a potent. In fact, I think one of the titles used for him in English until recently is potentate. He is ultimately potent, and his peace is potent, and we pray for that potent peace to be upon the Convening conference. So with that in mind, I'm just going to acknowledge the people who are with us so far right now. We got Ben with us from Texas, and Jen, right? The finance stuff is so important. Tim, Lisa, and oh no, a dog ate the donuts for the kids. That's something close to a worst case scenario right there. Somehow I keep moving the text here. All right, well, y'all continue to sign in. Let me know particular questions you have. I'm going to bring Matt on screen now. Y'all remember Matthew Conover. He is the treasurer for Mid-South. No, not Mid-South. Mid-South,
Yeah,
Mid-South,
Mid-South.
Right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then he and I have done a private, proper interview that talks about him and his ministry before, which you can find by just searching on my YouTube channel. But he also joined me, was it on Monday, to speak about some stuff, or was it last week? I don't know. It was somewhat recently on the live stream. So he's a person who he's going to be a delegate to the Convening conference. So he's getting ready to go to Costa Rica. He's got his big binder right in front of him right now. And he's obviously theologically exactly where he needs to be, because he and I agree about everything. So he's obviously in the right place. But also he's just got a great. I think I'd consider you like middle management. You're in touch with who's on the ground and the grassroots sentiments, but also what's going on at the top and the different policies and procedures and personalities being pushed. Apparently, I'm big on alliterations this morning. So, what helpful things do you think are there to say before we get? I've got two graphics, and in particular view, we're going to be looking at the Episcopal plans. But I'd be surprised if we only go there. So what is there any helpful groundwork to lay before we look at this stuff you've got for us today?
Well, yeah, we're going to start with the Episcopal plans and take a look at, it seems a common theme everybody wants to know or claims that this plan or that plan is cheaper. And we're going to take a look at that. And then we'll get into the other petitions. And there's a couple themes that are running through those as well. And some common themes. And hopefully we can get everybody in and out. And if there's any questions, we'll be glad to do it.
Okay. You ready to, should I bring the graphic up?
Yeah. Why don't you bring up the org chart?
Okay.
So what I've done is I've tried to develop an idea of what the two plans will look like in an org chart so I can count heads. That seems just to be the easiest way for me. I'm more of a visual guy.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see in front of you is our 9 bishops. Those 9 bishops, at first, I assumed all 9 of them would have conference superintendents for each of their annual conferences. And when David was on your show, he spoke that that's probably not the case, and I tend to believe him. So I took a reasonable look at how many conferences may share a conference superintendent and how many may not. So when you're looking at the chart, the first 2 bishops, all of them have conference superintendents, all 4 and all 8 of the yep. So they all have conference superintendents. And but if you go down to the one below that one, it's got 2 conferences sharing a conference superintendent. And down below, you've got a couple other conferences sharing some superintendents. So in all, right now, we have 35 conferences. And those 35 will share 9 bishops. That number is determined. The number at question is how many conference superintendents would there be? And I am looking right now at probably 27 conference superintendents in the TLC plan. So
let me back up for viewers real quick, because a lot of you are going to know the basic differences between the TLC plan and the Florida plan, but a lot of people are just going to be checking in right now. What needs to be known in order to understand this better is that there are some denominations that don't have bishops, but it doesn't look like the Global Methodist Church is going to be one of them. There are Methodist denominations that don't have bishops, but it looks like the Global Methodist Church is pretty set on having overseers. That's really what the title bishop means. And it's people with the eagle eye view over large portions of the church. And given that bishops did not go well in the United Methodist Church for us, how can we augment the role and the structure so that we can feel good about it? There are 2 main plans on the table. One is put forward by the key institutional leader. At this point, the transitional leadership council, and they have put forward the organizational plan right before us right here, where you have bishops over several annual conferences. Each of the annual conferences run by a conference superintendent, except for when they want to share a conference superintendent, which is liable to happen in areas where there isn't as many churches or as much money. And so that's what Mr. Conover's figured in here. But there's also the Florida plan, which doesn't have this bishop sitting that high at the top. Rather, there's a bishop over every annual conference. Some of the conferences will share a bishop. And I've interviewed proponents for both plans, and you can look those up now. And as Matthew has said, both proponents have said that their plan is cheaper. So that's partly what we're going to look at here. But in order to do that math, we have to understand, okay, how many conferences are we really talking about? How many bishops and conference superintendents are we really talking about? That's the hard work that's needed to get done that my brain is too small for and Matt's isn't. So we're looking at the TLC plan first. That's what we just covered. And then when Matthew's ready to go on, we'll go on to the Florida plan and we can compare and contrast. So I think that's the only thing that needs to get said before we go any further. Go ahead.
Thanks for doing that, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
That was good analysis. So the TLC plan, remember each plan is going to have the same number of annual conferences, regardless of what shakes out at general conference. The annual conferences are going to be the annual conferences. Mm-hmm. There's no petitions to change those, to merge any that I'm aware of. So right now, 35 annual conferences. The question is how many bishops and how many conference superintendents or pro tems, as they're being called now. Mm-hmm. So in the TLC plan, I've got 9 bishops and I have 27 conference superintendents. So let's go to the second page. This is the Florida plan. It's sponsored by the Florida delegation. In that plan, they have an interim period for 2 years, for 25 and 26. In that interim period, basically nothing changes.
Right.
The current 3 bishops are the current bishops. Every conference has a conference superintendent. Now, some of those conference superintendents, I should make it clear that some of those are part-time. Ours is one. Some are part-time, some are full-time. So I don't have a handle on how many of what. I took a pretty good estimate, but just to keep in mind that some of these, not all of these conference superintendents are full-time.
And to be clear,
so this is the current one.
With respect to the TLC plan, also the conference superintendents can also be part-time in that plan, right?
Yep, and I took that into account.
Very good.
So if you go to the next page, this is the one that's going to be different than the way it is today. Again, we have 35 conferences, and but in this scenario, I can foresee 27 bishops. Now, some people have said, why so many? How come more aren't sharing? Mm-hmm. The answer is that there's some geographical things that are going to be impossible to get around, especially outside of the United States.
Right.
The United States, you can do that well, and maybe have a couple conferences, maybe even 3 or 4, but outside the United States to do a model such as the ones on the bottom row would be difficult.
So
With
let's
that said,
let's think about like
go ahead.
Nigeria. Nigeria has 4 annual conferences in
Yes.
one right now Episcopal area. Um, it would be reasonable to imagine that there's going to be just one bishop overall for annual conferences. It's also reasonable to think maybe they would have one bishop over two apiece there.
Yeah.
There's also like the Philippines where there are 2 annual conferences, and it's geographically very separated, actually. That's why there's two. But maybe there could be one bishop over 2 annual conferences. So, but what I think I understand you to be saying is because of the geographic separation of a lot of annual conferences outside of the U.S., it's more likely that there will be just one bishop over one annual conference abroad. Is that what I understood you to say?
Right. So it'd be difficult to for the annual conference in Spain
Right.
to share a um, bishop with Bulgaria.
Sure.
It'd be very difficult. So that's that's why you're seeing more silos than I think a lot of people expect. Um, but that then on the other hand, a lot of people on the TLC assume that every annual conference is going to have a bishop, and that's not true. So I think this is a good hybrid of the hybrid. Um, so what you see is 24 or 27 um, bishops. Now, some of those bishops in their annual conferences are going to have a conference superintendent,
Mm-hmm.
such as the bottom row,
Okay.
especially if they have multiple conferences answering to them. If they share a conference, you may want to have a conference superintendent to help take care of that conference.
So the
Even
Florida plan still makes room for conference superintendents?
it does.
Okay.
It does. Yep. And I have talked to some conferences that have no um, no qualms saying that they will have a conference superintendent and a bishop, no matter what, whether they are going to share with an annual conference or not.
Yeah, like, go ahead.
Remember too that this is all voluntary. Any sharing of a bishop is voluntary.
Right.
That this will not be um, strewn upon you as an annual conference.
I was talking with Matt O'Reilly recently, and his conference, of course, came out with an official, we are going to vote for the TLC plan. And how he said it was, like the Florida plan just doesn't at all fit with how we've been doing it. It would destroy everything we've set up so far. So if that has anything to do with conference superintendents, then the Florida plan still makes room for conference superintendents and would not necessarily undo any polity that's been created around an assumption of a TLC format. Like the bishops could still lead in a similar way to how they were hoping. Conference superintendents could still operate kind of how they were imagining. So maybe the Florida plan is not quite as destructive as it sounds like it would for the TLC design.
Well, and the other thing that's not being discussed is if you go to the second slide, the one above that,
Mm-hmm.
you have a conference superintendent in each one. Uh, it's fully anticipated that many of these conference superintendents, should the Florida plan pass, will become bishops.
Uh-huh.
And many of them will stay in the annual conference that they're in right now.
Okay.
So, um, with that said, I don't think there would be much disruption as what people would think with a plan such as this.
Interesting. Okay. I think that's really helpful to know. Let's just try and sympathize with people who are concerned about the Florida plan. Do you think there is anything from the Florida plan that would um, significantly reduce the kind of ministry that they're hoping that the TLC plan would provide, or do you think that the Florida plan really is not quite as bad as a lot of people think?
Both and there's parts of this Florida plan that are very appealing. I like the independence, but yet I also understand and like the idea of having um, some teaching bishops
Hmm.
or bishops that are going to um, hold the faith a little more than what had been before. If we had um, bishops and silos in our past denomination, um, we end up with where we were.
Hmm.
We don't want that. We don't want
Right.
bishops and silos. So the TLC plan is attractive that way.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the Florida plan is flatter in a way. Um, there there are um, less layers, but when we get to the finance part, you're going to see that we have something called in the business world is called a FTE, a full-time employer or employee,
Oh, yeah, I
full-time
see that
employee.
in the third column here, full-time employees, total
Right,
full-time employees. So, yeah, everybody who's watching the screen, you should be able to see another document that Matt sent me. You got the TLC plan and the Florida plan, and it can contrast total full-time employees. So go ahead and lead us
right.
through this at your leisure.
So on the left, the blue in the blue shading is the TLC plan, and you've got what we, if you remember, we all have 35 conferences, no matter which plan you're looking at. We have 9 bishops in the TLC plan. I'm computing 27 conference superintendents, some of those full time, some of those part time, some of those are being shared by a annual conference or two or three or four. That's why you don't see 35 in that column. Um, so my best estimate is that 8 superintendents will disappear through those different avenues, either sharing or full time, part time. So you end up with a total full time equivalence of 36.
That would be so both plans end up so with the Florida plan for the first 2 years before 2026 there are 29 and a half full-time employees equivalent,
Right,
whereas with the TLC plan immediately we go up to 36. We've only got 9 bishops, but then we get 27 conference superintendents because some of the conferences are going to share a conference superintendent. With the Florida plan, we only have 3 bishops for the next 2 years, with a bunch of conference superintendents. And then in 2026, we shift to having 27 bishops. TLC plan only has 9 going forward. Bishops go up to 27, but then there are also conference superintendents. You imagine there being 9 for a
yeah,
total of. So both plans have a total of 36 total full time employees
correct,
at this level. Okay.
correct.
I'm glad I summed it up all right so far.
Yep, correct. And what you're looking at is you're looking at a 8 year total, 8 years because you got the first 2 years through 26, and then we're going to have the next general conference, and then general conference after that will be in 2032.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be best to look at an entire 8 years, especially with the 2 years difference in the Florida plan, so we could get apples to apples.
Right on.
Um, so you're looking at a total of about $51 million
Mm-hmm.
is what the TLC plan will cost.
Yeah.
That's about, well, it's about 6.4 million a year, and that will be the same amount year after year. um, and, um, and that's the cost. My best estimates. Um,
So yeah, let's talk about estimating that because what an estimate would require, there is not one base pay for bishops. Rather, bishop salaries are going to be determined by the connectional committee on episcopacy. I forget
It's-
exactly what it's called, but it's a top-down committee responsible for the episcopacy that takes in mind the missional, the Episcopal area, the cost of living, and all this. So you haven't assumed that every bishop is going to get paid the exact same amount. Rather, you've assumed that there's going to be difference in salaries based on where they live.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Geographically, especially outside the US. Um, I've I've got salaries as low as 60% of those in the US. So there's some areas in outside the US that I'm calculating that way.
Okay.
So
And then
yeah,
also,
we're
as I
taking
look
that
at
into
this, I
account.
notice that in the TLC plan and the Florida plan, there's 36 total full-time employees starting in 2026. But even so, the total salary for the TLC plan is 6.4 million. Total salary for the Florida plan is 6.3 million. So why is it that even though they have the same number of full-time employees, you calculate um, uh, $1 million difference between salaries in one plan and the other?
That's a really good question. It's the mix of bishops and conference superintendents. It's anticipated your bishops will probably be making more than a conference superintendent, and the same in both plans. So in the TLC plan, you're looking at 6.4 million. That's because you only have 9 bishops, whereas you have 27 bishops, but the conference superintendents are low. In the Florida plan, you're down to 6.3. There's the other issue here is it is easier, and I made some assumptions that a lot of the conference superintendents will be outside the US in the Florida plan, more than in the US. And it's just an assumption that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to me, it logically followed. But when, if you would scroll over to the right a little bit, the difference, yeah, there you go. The difference is 144,000. Um,
Oh, I
once you
said a
get
million,
past
but
the
it's
first two
only.
years.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay.
Yeah, it's only 144,000. And
And in
then
a
the
church
2 years,
budget, the size we're looking at, that dollar amount is actually not very big, right?
that when you're talking 35 annual conferences,
Yeah.
um, it's, and in fact, the per conference amount is on the bottom. You see the $4,000 number on
Yeah.
the bottom right.
Yeah.
That is the total difference on average. Remember, this is greater. There's the model is bigger than just a bunch.
Yeah.
Throw them all together, but on average, $4,000 difference between the two plans. So it's, in my humble opinion, that neither plan is cheaper than the other.
Yeah, that's what I was. It seems kind of clear. I mean, like, it seems like, okay, there's the number of conference superintendents and the number of bishops, and that depends partly on the number of conferences. There's just a lot of projecting that we can't accurately do. We can just only make assumptions about, what are the odds that, we're going to have conference superintendents rather than bishops abroad more often. How many conferences are going to choose to share a conference superintendent or share all these things? We can't know for sure. But as you look at the different things, at least you, with your informed perspective, it looks like either plan can turn out being a little bit cheaper than the other, but it's not going to be a significant thing either way unless something really is just significantly different than you imagine. But
Right.
this is an educate. Do you want to say anything about the salary distribution piece at the bottom?
Oh, yeah. On the bottom, there and there are some people that this does matter. First, above, That is a total dollar amount regardless of whether it's paid by the annual conference or paid by the general conference. That's just total, regardless of who pays what.
Hmm.
But on the bottom half, I broke that out.
Okay.
What,
Yeah.
according to the plans, the annual conferences would pay and the general conferences would pay. Um, the Florida plan is obviously heavier, um, because they're going to be paying for bishops, um, more bishops in the Florida plan, um, and less conference superintendents. Um, so even so, your Florida plan is very heavy for the annual conference.
So I'm
Um,
remembering that Matt O'Reilly was talking about how by the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, the annual conference can only ask up to 1.5% of
no,
income.
annual conference can get 5,
Up to 5. Okay.
and then general conference can get 1.5.
Okay. So that's what
General
he was
conference.
saying would
Yeah,
limit how much the TLC plan can require because it can only go up to 1.5, and that's how bishops would be paid, is out of that general Episcopal fund.
exactly.
But the Florida
Exactly.
plan only has a 5% cap, so they can hypothetically require a lot more of local churches in order to fund bishops, depending on how they calculate the salary and if they have their own bishop and all this. So that
Right.
that point holds up.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
it does. The only thing I want to caution people on being myopic on whether the annual conference or the general conference pays, the local church pays. Um, it will be part of your connectional funding. E- Either way, both plans will be paid by the local church. The idea is to keep local dollars in the local church to do ministry and mission where it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea. So we got to, as delegates, we need to remember every dollar that we put into a plan takes it out of the local church and away from places that do ministry.
Yeah.
Um, that's I don't want to get on my high horse about it, but I will get on my high horse about it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, when we're coming out of the United Methodist Church, there's so many people who are already just certain we're going to get on the same inexorable path towards the directionality towards the top rather than the top being directionally concerned with the bottom. And I'm not that pessimistic about that, actually. I think we've already started off so strongly in a certain direction that we're just going to be allergic to anything that sounds like sending more dollars up to the top than need be. Quit being weird. Come here. Thank you. All right. Sorry, my daughter's bringing me coffee. I
No
need a steady
worries.
drip. Yeah, you're not being weird, Matthews. All right. Thank you, daughter.
Well, it's not been put past me.
Let's. Was there anything else pertaining to the TLC plan versus the Florida plan? We've already heard your analysis that one plan is not likely to be significantly more expensive than the other, and I think that's the
Right.
key takeaway for delegates. Their concerns, their decision needs to be made not on financial assumptions, but based on theological and organizational convictions. So I think that's the long and short of it that I'm taking away from. But are there any other
Mhm.
details or larger thoughts that you think delegates need
Well,
to have?
details. The one detail that does concern me with the TLC plan is the accountability piece in allowing the complaints to be heard at the assembly of bishops level. Um, that is kind of concerning for me. I would just necessarily um, soon not have that. I'm almost certain that any kind of um, compromise plan will will move that out. I've just got I got to believe that will be done.
Well, and even
Um,
Matt O'Reilly, who was in favor of the plan, said this is one of the things that needs to get changed on it. I don't think
yeah,
hardly anyone's actually in favor of that provision. So I will be very surprised if the TLC plan is adopted without that being amended.
yep, yep. That's my largest concern.
Yeah.
Um, I believe that um, when you're looking at people, the people that will be bishops um, in the Florida plan are already the conference superintendents. So I don't see rearranging people and having different leadership in either plan. I think the leadership is going to be the leadership
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
Um, so I just want, you know, I want the delegates not to um, be so concerned as to how to arrange the chairs as much as how, you know, um, what the accountability is and make sure that we get that right.
That makes sense to me. And yeah, accountability, transparency, you and I share a lot of the same values and concerns around that, as do most people who watch my channel and who are watching this. I think I've had an average watch viewer count on each of these live streams going through petitions of about 200 people. It's hard to say
Mhm.
how many of those are delegates. Most people don't comment or let me know that they're watching, but my hope has been all along that a lot of delegates watch this so that they can think through the content well. The bishops, of course, the Episcopal plans are the main thing that everybody's anxious about and wanting to get to the bottom of. I feel like you've done a great job on that component, but this is not the only thing where financial concerns matter so far as how delegates should be thinking and voting. So, did you have clarity on any other things
I
coming
do.
before? Yeah, go ahead.
Um, there are pretty much there are, I want to say, three primary themes that I want to talk about. Um, the the first one is clergy benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Clergy benefits is a big deal, and the cost of insurance is huge.
Right.
The small church gets pinched. The larger churches are able to afford it, and the pastors and clergy are having um, tug of war between everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what has happened from the UMC? The UMC, the annual conferences were in charge of their own health and benefit plan. Each end of each individual conference had its own
Mm-hmm.
and would have a group health plan.
Right.
Um, in the GMC, that has changed, where it is one plan for the US.
Mm-hmm.
That the reasoning behind that is if we have 20 conferences in the US, each one of those conferences would have to have a benefits coordinator in order to have the benefits at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about bureaucracy now, you're talking about 20 more people within the connection
Mm-hmm.
if that benefit was at the annual conference level. At the general conference level, we have one coordinator and a couple of wonderful people that assist them, and it's um, it's a plan that goes throughout the connection. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is that there was cross connectional appointments if that's the case, we want to make sure that we have a benefit package that can go with the employee
Mhm.
from one uh, one annual conference to another.
Sure. Yeah.
It'll be seamless for them. Um, there are um, uh, some delegates in some conferences that believe that they can uh, do this cheaper at the annual conference level.
Yeah, I think you were on the live stream when we were covering a piece of legislation from the Trinity Conference that was trying to get this
Right.
able to be dealt with on the conference level rather than the general church level.
Right. And the petition seems really innocuous, just very it's petition, I want to say 69. I'm looking at my screen. I believe it's
I think you're right.
69. Um, it um just it's trying to expand the annual conference FAC just to include pensions and benefits. To read that, um, you're changing 4 words, inserting 4 words.
Yeah, pension plans,
Um,
benefit plans. That's what it adds in there under the Finance and Administration Committee jobs in each annual conference. There's going to be a
yeah,
Finance and Administration Committee in every annual conference. But one of
correct.
the things that is not on their plate in the TLC plan is pension plans and benefit plans. Well, it's not the
Right.
TLC plan. It's just whatever the latest version of the doctrines and disciplines is.
Which
Um,
is, yeah, the TLC.
yeah,
The
yeah, they're the ones
TL,
that have edited that.
yeah,
Yeah, so this takes puts the rights back in each annual conference to negotiate these things rather than defer to the general church.
correct, correct. My fear is that if this was accomplished, that the annual conferences will uh, then be left trying to find, first of all, they'll have to hire a benefits coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, they're going to have to uh, find and get themselves a group insurance policy. They would have a year. I believe we have another year on with Guidestone contractually. Um, and by the way, the rates for Guidestone are not going to change at the beginning of the year. The same rates. You can't say that by about many plans at all. Many of them are going up to even 10%. So we're we're happy that we can just do that.
So the health insurance conversation, I mean, health insurance has been a terrible issue in this country for a long time. For we don't need to get into the purposes, but it's been insurance has been rising in cost across the board for various reasons. Under the not Westpath, under the Guidestone plan, the base like bare minimum plan that all full-time clergy have to be in is $10,500 a year, which for small churches is just, well, it can end a church,
Yeah.
frankly. So there are a lot of conferences thinking that maybe they can negotiate something cheaper than this. And hypothetically, maybe that's true, but the reality is that the tide is rising everywhere. We've at least gotten locked into a certain rate with Guidestone that they can't raise it. They're not going to raise it at least for a year. But if you let these conferences go out on their own, well, all of a sudden there's a new staff person they have to pay, so that's an automatic additional cost. But also, they may or may not be able to negotiate a cheaper plan that has as many benefits. So it's a very risky thing to do. I don't. If you're saying flat out this is a bad thing to even think about doing, I'm not hearing that. What I'm hearing is it's a very risky thing that might work out for some annual conferences, but really hurt some others.
It I would go so far to say it's very risky. Um, and if we were um, prudent about this, um, one of the things that instead of doing a petition like this, I think I'd be more open to seeing a petition putting together a task force to study it
Mm,
and study it right and do this right. Um, and that way we can inform the annual conferences if we do go back to the annual conference level.
hmm.
We can at least inform the annual conferences of how we see things going in each individual conference. I think for 2 years, um, and we know 1 year contractually, at least we got to stay with Guidestone.
Yeah.
Um, so let's take advantage of a shortened general conference year and do 2 years and study this and make sure we get this right. We want to get the bishops right this go around. Let's get the pensions right in 2 years.
That sounds reasonable. And so this is one of the conversations that your legislative committee is going to have. You're on the legislative committee dealing with GMC finance stuff. So we've talked
Well,
about.
unfortunately, though, these petitions are not in the finance committee.
Oh, sure. Well, okay.
They're not.
Petition 69 is not. Well, I feel like if
It's in the
pension plans and
conference.
benefit plans, it really that's in the conferences committee, huh?
It's in the conferences committee because
Oh,
it's
yeah. It says it
changing the
right there.
organization within the conference. So some are in the connectional organization. There's one or two in the Constitution. Um, so uh, even
Well,
the TLC plan has a place in it where that they it could be construed as a move towards the annual conference. I think it was not intended, but it could be construed. Anyway, um,
so I think what
needless to
what might
say,
need
it's
to be
all over the
said is
board.
that any people on legislative committees where you're realizing you're dealing with something that has financial implications, but you're not in the financial legislative committee, it might be wise to reach out to Matt Conover here, who's the treasurer of
Yeah.
Mid South Annual Conference. Is there anyone else that you think has a good bird's eye view on this stuff that they could reach out to? Surely Robert Worthington can't comment. Well, maybe he can comment on this stuff. It'd be good to reach out to him. Maybe
Yeah.
anybody else?
I would start with Robert.
Okay.
Um, and I think he'd be a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he um, he and I have discussed the issue, and I could tell you he's very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So I think he would be a good resource as well. But if you see anything that's any petitions, and maybe you can make this available to your audience and they can print it out or whatever. But it lists the petitions um, that have to do with clergy benefits and some of the language that is causing that. So maybe they can keep an eye on that in their legislative committees.
Sounds important. I mean,
Um,
it's the sort of thing that if we get wrong could sink a lot of churches or, put our clergy in very vulnerable positions. So, were
right.
there other issues that you think need to
There,
be thought through out loud here?
um, the other two are budget and transparency, and they kind of go hand in hand. Um, Budgeting and connectional funding are different in the GMC than what it used to be in our prior denomination.
Mm-hmm.
The annual conference passes a percentage, and that's all they're required to do is pass a percentage. And then the conference council will go through and um, take whatever they think that percentage is, develop a budget and pass that budget, and then apply it in the next year. One of the problems is uh, if we set a um, dollar amount, I think um, you start getting into an annual conference that will start nitpicking on different line items of budgets. Um, I, I think this will streamline things. It also keeps everybody accountable because no matter what, you're not going to get more than in the Mid-South 3.5% for 2025. And that's all that's all we're going to get, and it is what it is. And I think it's the right way to go is keeping the budget on a percentage basis, not a dollar line by line basis.
Are there any? So what I think I'm recalling from the TLC legislation about how we do budgeting is that the Connectional Council, which is the group that sits atop of the whole structure and enacts the will of the General Conference in the 6 years in between sessions, that they, on an annual basis, put together a budget that's based on the average total income of the entire denomination, and they're only able to commit 90% of the average income from the last 2 years to the current budget. And then based on that value, that's how everything's divvied up to determine how many full-time employees they can have, what kind of insurance they can offer, what kind of ministries, and
how many bishops.
Oh, sure. So all of that would just be determined on an annual basis by the Connectional Council based on that 90% rate. You agree that 90% is probably the right rate to look at? Go ahead.
I'm not a fan of the 90%. I'm not a fan of it.
What would you propose?
I would just allow the Connectional Council to put together a budget.
Okay.
What happens with that 90% is that you end up with 10% left. That's good to have something to fall back on, but you'll never be able to spend it. The way it's written, it can never be part of a budget. And then that 10% will be added onto the next 10%.
So there's sometimes things that come up in the needs of an organization where there's just an immediate need and it's not budgeted for. Hypothetically, if they were storing up that extra 10% a year, would they be able to call on that for special needs as they come along? Or would they have to sit on it? I mean, how does that work?
Well, that would be up to the Connectional Council.
Okay.
As to whether or not they could spend it. My fear is that it would and so it's my PTSD of the UMC of looking at a $200 million reserve that they've amassed. And we want to keep, as I said before, we want to keep ministry dollars in the local church. Building reserves can be tricky. You can still build a reserve even without the 90% rule. There's nothing saying that the Connectional Council would put aside in their budget a amount for a reserve. That we've done that here at the annual conference, and it's prudent. But I wouldn't legislate it for just there are years that you may not be able to do and be able to put aside 10%.
Yeah, if I were to sum up the principle there, it would be if you're going to have people who are supposed to lead in a dynamic situation, then you don't want to hamstring them unnecessarily. You want them to be able to respond dynamically to the needs of the denomination on an annual basis, but even more frequently than that. So if you're limiting them to only 90%, or if you're constraining how it is that they can build up reserves, then you're really limiting how they can responsibly lead in a way. I mean, it's obviously with good intentions. You don't want to replicate what we did in the UMC, but also what I notice as you're talking through these things, there are ways in which the United Methodist Church actually had more regional autonomy than what the GMC has, and where there was more regional leadership, whereas the GMC is really putting a lot more authority into the connectional council and some of these permanent positions. So this is a big experiment that we would do well to look at, not just the UMC, but other denominations at with respect to. So you had the concern of budgeting, and in your mind, we should maybe or definitely consider helping them be more versatile in creating an annual budget and adapting to the needs of the denomination.
Yep.
You were also connecting that to transparency. So what's there to say about transparency?
Well, that's transparency within the budget is a huge issue. You're not going to earn trust without transparency. We are working at the Mid-South. We've issued what our values are, and one of those values is transparency and openness, and allowing people to see what our balance sheet looks like, what our income statement looks like. Those are available. We are working on getting everything on the website, but as soon as you drop me an email, it will be yours. So there's nothing to hide. We need to shy away from the idea that people don't know what they're talking about. In trusting the clergy, trusting the laity, trusting those outside the GMC. If they want to look at those financials, they can have a look at them. If they have questions, they can come to us. There's a lot of tension even within the conference treasurers, some that don't want to do this and some that do. I think the openness creates trust.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm 100% with you there.
Right.
I'm curious, you've looked through all the petitions and I haven't. Are there, of course, I've got my own petitions that involve accountability and transparency. Are there others that you're familiar with that you think need to, is there anything that you think would be a threat to transparency that's coming before the general conference, or are there any other petitions that you think would be good?
I'd like we can talk about yours for a second, 243 and 245.
243. All right.
Yeah, 243 is financial transparency. That's that hits all of my buckets. One of the things that is in your petition, I believe there's a mention of pension and health benefits somewhere within it, and I don't know if it was intentional or not. There it was in the finance administration right here, and
okay, so here's the new language that I proposed. Yeah. And I shouldn't take Ruth Blake is one of the primary authors who got into the nitty gritty on this. Let's see. Man, it's been I haven't looked at this honestly since I submitted it. So I've had some people contact me from the legislative committee saying, "Hey, do you want to stick with this? Do you feel strongly about this?" And my main thing is just the broad picture, regular, transparent reporting. So okay, so would it be somewhere in here, the pension and health benefits?
Yeah, it's
I'm not seeing it. I guess I could do a word search here in pension. Oh, but it went.
I went to the beginning of the document.
It did, yes.
Yeah.
So I bet a better person
I'm
could.
pretty sure. I remember seeing it, but regardless if it is, I'd be careful of that.
Okay. Okay, yeah, because
The
stuff we've talked about, yeah.
right. The budget language, it sounds like you're wanting a dollar budget instead of a percentage budget. Um, again, that is really, really difficult for a conference finance and administration team to come up with one in June to be exercised 6 months later, and you're only dealing with 6 months of income uh, to project and project it for 18 months, up to 18 months after that annual conference. Um, I
So
know
if we're
that,
looking at, so the thing I care about is not what do we project we're going to spend, because I don't know. Like there's what you prognosticate, and then there's what happens. What I want to know is what has been spent and where, and then what the current balances are.
right.
So that's where I care about the nitty gritty. I mean, it's not that I don't care at all about percentages and projections. It's just that I actually care about what has actually transpired, and maybe that's too late. But in my head, even if I sign off on here's the projected budget that you anticipate, there are going to be needs that come along, and it's just not going to go that way. And I can get bent out of shape about that, or I can just look at, okay, how did you spend it, and was that a faithful rendering of our values, or does it look like it's getting shifted over here to this thing that's really not in our interest? That's the whole point of this. So, but I have no doubt the way that, I mean, I think Ruth probably did a fantastic job authoring this, but I just know that I'm a big picture guy. My nitty gritty is low quality.
Yeah, she did an awesome job, and it's definitely it's going to be the primary petition that we'll be dealing with in the Finance and Administration Committee.
Oh, good.
So,
Good.
um, the other petitions are um, relatively just a lot of name changes from the TLC over to the general conference. So this will be the main petition that we'll be looking at. And I've put together a edited piece of this, and I'll send it off to you and see what your thoughts are on it. But
Thank you.
um, this is this will be um, what they'll be what they'll be looking at.
Who's the chair of that
Transparency
committee?
is huge on here. Pardon?
Who's the chair of the Legislative Committee on Finance?
Oh goodness. Um. Oh. From Florida. Um. He has a wonderful Cuban ministry going,
Hmm.
and I am
Well, I might
trying
not know
to.
the name anyway. So they're hopefully
Yeah.
going to be publishing the names of all the chairs today. I think is what they were aiming at. I spoke with Tom Lambrecht earlier this week, who said they were going to publish that. So I'll be in touch with him, not because I'm going to try and sway the vote or anything, but I'm trying to secure interviews with all of the chairs of the committees next week in our live coverage. So we'll see about that. But I'm glad that the committee is going to be taking my proposal seriously. The things that you've said I wouldn't disagree with at all, but I just think what I've said consistently is we can get all of our theology right, we can get all of our polity right, but if we don't get the culture right around transparency and accountability, then all of this stuff that we build right in other places doesn't matter. And so
Yeah.
I'm just of the mind that whatever we build, we have to have a culture of absolute transparency and trusting. You were right, I think, to say that this has to do with trusting people on the ground level and even people on the outside of the GMC.
Yeah.
That's the only way that everybody's talking about trust right now, but the only way to earn trust is to show your work. And so there are a lot of people that just can't seem to understand that or receive that. And I think hopefully the work of the legislative committees will help this come out into light, and people can digest this about a bit better. It's 8:35, and we've gotten a couple of questions for you, but I like incentivizing people going over to locals. And so that's what I'm going to do at this point. Anyone who wants to hear Matt respond to the questions that have been written out or submit new questions to him, you can go over to plainspoken.locals.com. If you need to see that and to type it into your URL, I'll show you on the screen following, and then we're going to cut the feed on Facebook and YouTube and just go over to locals. So we're going to take a quick break. Matt, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And if you're on locals, just stay there. We're going to stay there. All right. We'll be right back.